In this quick video I want to show you how I take apart the CZ-75 shadow, how I clean it, and then put it back together. So the tools I use are just screwdriver, tweezers, and a punch. And then I use hot piece number 9, the bore brush, and I've always put a patch on the bore brush, soak it in hot piece number 9, run it through, and then just keep doing that with the new patch until it's clean. After you're done cleaning the inside of the barrel with hot piece number 9, make sure you spray it with oil, and then you just leave a residue of oil inside the barrel and that'll keep it protected. And then I like to use a cleaner and oil combo. So it's got solvent in there and it's got oil in there, so I just use that, brush it up, spray it again, wipe it off just to clean it. I use this like a cleaner and then I just leave the residue as oil, which is what it's meant to do. You don't need to clean the entire gun with hot piece because it's not all that fouled up, just the ramp and the barrel is fouled up, so you can use this solvent and oil for the rest of the firearm. So let's get started. So we've checked it's clear, now we can start taking it apart. So to take the slide out, you gotta remove the slide retaining pin. So you just stick your thumb through the trigger guard, you pull back until these two things align. Then you just gotta tap that side, just hit it with something plastic so you don't damage your finish. Take that out, and then this will just slide forward. So if you're field stripping it, that's all you gotta do. And then I've got a buffer in here, so you gotta pull back on the buffer and then pull out your guide rod, recoil spring. You got your buffer. And there's your barrel. Nice and clean. So I use hot piece number 9 to clean the ramp, clean inside the barrel. You don't really need to use it to clean everything else because there's not much fouling on it. But this part you could clean because this gets quite a bit of fouling. Your extractor has a spring behind it and the pin actually punches out from the top. So that pin holds your extractor in. You'll need a small punch. So you just tap this lightly. The pin will come out the bottom. And then just make sure this doesn't go flying when you pull it off. There's your extractor. It's the pin for your extractor. And there's your extractor spring. And your firing pin comes out the back. All you got to do is push in on your firing pin and then this piece slides out. And then of course this is spring loaded, so put your finger in front of it and slide this plate off. Once that plate comes off, your firing pin will come straight out. There's your firing pin spring. This one's a lightened one, and you can clean all that stuff up. Spray some solvent or oil solvent in there. These things can be removed, but you gotta have a pretty good punch to punch that out. You can use, what is it, a 1.5 millimeter Allen key to take out that little set screw, and this thing will punch straight out. So let's take off the grip and then remove this little guard here. So all you gotta do is punch this out. And this guard slides up. Once you get your magazine guide out, that thing just allows the magazine to not hit your main spring. Then you can go ahead and take this main spring retaining block out. So this is your main spring here. When you replace this, you'll reduce the amount of force that it takes to pull back on your hammer, and you'll reduce the amount of energy the hammer hits with. That's why when you replace your main spring, you have to replace your firing pin spring, because this thing's going to get hit with less force. So this has to be a lighter spring. So if you make this lighter, you've got to make the other one lighter. So to get this out, you have to push down on the bottom while pushing this pin out. Sometimes the pin will fall out by itself, but it doesn't always do that. So that time it fell out by itself, but if not, you have to push it out with this. Put that aside. I like to put everything in order so that I can go back and put it all in, just so I don't have to mess around with trying the different pins. The pins only fit in one spot, so if you do lose the positions of the pins, you can get it all back together still without confusing anything, but it's best not to confuse them. To get your hammer out, you've got to get the Sear assembly out first, and that's pretty hard, but I'll show you how to do that. That's what the small flathead's for. So if you see this little spring, this spring here, that spring holds the safety in. The safety is what holds the Sear assembly in. So if you lift that little spring here and put it on top of this edge, so now that you've got it up there, you can go ahead and slide out the safety. It comes out this side, and once you do that, the Sear assembly will try to fall. So pull that out. You got to be careful because there's a safety little clicking thing here, and that will go flying out. So there's a spring behind it. When you take this out, make sure you don't let the spring go flying anywhere. So face it somewhere where it won't go flying. And that's what the tweezers are for. This thing's really small, so it's hard to get in and out. Look at that thing. So that just holds your safety in place. And then there's another small piece that holds the right side safety in. And that piece is tiny. It goes flying, so be careful with that. Once you have that out, this thing just falls out by itself. So now there's this little retaining pin here. You take that retaining pin out, and then the other pin that holds the hammer in will come out. So this pin pops out, and then this pin that holds the hammer comes out, and then your hammer can actually just come out. If you want to disassemble this even further, you can go ahead and punch these out. Not punch them out, but just slide them out. Now you're going to start getting a lot of little pins that look the same, so try to keep them separate. And here's an important warning. This pin here is hammered in such that it doesn't come out. It's frictioned in there, so if you punch it out, it's not going to hold itself back in as well. It needs to be pressed in like that because there's nothing holding it from the sides and it moves, so do not take those out. If there's anything that's pressed in that doesn't have anything else retaining it in, then don't press it out. The same applies for this little pin here that holds your trigger in. If you punch this out, you've got to have some special tool to punch it back in and make sure it doesn't come out. Otherwise, every time you pull the trigger, it's going to slowly creep its way out. So don't take this pin or this pin out. Now you need a flathead to remove your magazine release, and this is how you flip it to the other side if you're left-handed. So just remove this flathead screw on the bottom. Once you got that out, the spring will come out, and then you can use a screwdriver or something just to pull this out. So once you have the spring out, you can take your safety out, and if you're left-handed, you can easily switch that over to the other side. Now you can release the magazine with your left-hand thumb, so it's less awkward. Your slide retaining pin has a spring that holds it in place. If you want to remove that, you just push this out, and then the spring will just come out the top. I forgot to mention that you can take apart the Sear assembly if you really want to, but it's kind of tricky to put back together because that spring is very difficult to get in with the pin because it's all spring loaded. So you just punch this pin out and leave the punch in there. Put this aside so you know where it is. And it's not spring loaded if your pin's small enough, but it will be if it isn't, so make sure you don't lose that spring. Take the spring out. Now you can clean your Sear and Sear assembly. So the hammer pushes up against this Sear, and that's a very important part of the firearm because this part needs to be perfectly clean and have a smooth interaction. So clean all the fouling off that. Make sure you brush it up with some good oil protection. So even though this is the hardest part to take apart, it's the most important part of the firearm, so you need to clean this. You could do it without taking it apart, but to really get in there, of course you need to take it apart and get it super clean. So the trick to getting this back together is getting that pin in there, and what I do is push the spring from above. So push this pin in just far enough so that you can get the spring in, and what you're going to have to do is push the spring in from above while keeping this edge up. This edge is always going to try to fall down. So try to push it in there and get that pin to, and then use your other finger to push the pin in like that. So now you got the pin in, just push it in, and that's how you get it back in. So it's pretty easy to take apart, but it takes some skill to push in that spring and push in the pin at the same time. But that's how you do it. So I do it from the safety side. It just seems to work a lot better than pushing it in from this side, probably because it's closer. Now just make sure you lift that spring up onto the edge, otherwise you won't be able to get your safety in as easily next time. So that's how you take it all apart. Use something that has a cleaner and oil all in one, like rem oil. Use a nylon brush and just brush everything clean, wipe it off, leave a little bit of oil residue on there just to protect it from oxidation, and then you can put it all back together. So now take your main spring guide, put it into here, your hammer, and that's just slip fitted in there. You slide that down. Make sure this hook wraps around the trigger assembly, because when you pull that trigger it moves your hammer. Take your hammer pin, just slip that in, big side towards us, and then the retaining pin for that goes from above. This part is where tweezers will come in handy, putting it back together. Now we'll get our magazine release back in. Right-handed, so I'm going to put it on this side. This part's tricky. You might want to use needle nose pliers to get this one in. So you can use a flathead to hold one side in and push the other side in. The flathead. Once you get that in, you push it down. Keep your thumb there just to make sure it doesn't slide out again. This smaller spring goes above that, not below it. Put that in place and screw it all in together. Don't forget your slide lock retaining spring. So this one requires a flathead, so use your thumb, push that spring down, and then you can use your other hand to slide in the pin. Just enough. Now's the really tricky part. You've got to get these two small bits in, and you've got to get your Sear assembly and everything in there. There's a little trick with this one. If you crush the spring at the front and push it in, then it won't come apart. If you don't compress the spring at the front, this spring is going to come loose and you may lose it. So if this spring is falling loose from this piece, compress the front of the spring, and then so you can jam it in and it's stuck in there. Once it's stuck in there, you can actually just easily push this in and get that in place. There's a little notch here that allows you to grip it with a flathead screwdriver and slide it back when you get your safety in later. But it'll be easier to use tweezers to get that sucker in. This other side doesn't have a spring, but it's pretty finicky too. This piece can come out easily, so put some thick grease on there and keep an eye on it. If it's not in place after you put in your safety, then it's fallen out and you've got to take it apart again, find it, and get it back in place. So this, with the Sear in place, that won't fall out, but keep an eye on it just in case. Pull your hammer back a bit and that'll help you get in your Sear. This one has a notch on this side, so you have to face it upwards and then you slide it, turn it down. Once it's down, it'll be locked in place by that little piece you put in. Then you can take this side and push this in. Using that little notch on top, you'll want to use a flathead, pull it back, and then your safety will slide right in. And on the Sear assembly, you've got that spring sitting up on the edge. Push it down so that you can keep your safety in place. If you forget to do it, your slide's going to hit it anyways, but it's important to put it down now so you don't damage it later. Now we'll put our main spring back in. This part's kind of tricky. There's quite a bit of force involved. So what I do is just put this pin on top, and then when you can push that thing in, it'll slide into place. So you can grab something and just push it into place. Once it's in, you can hammer it the rest of the way. Put in the magazine guide. Once you have that hole lined up, just slide in the pin, put your grips on. These stock rubber grips are probably the best grips I've ever held on to. They don't move around in your hand and they keep the gun nice and stable. You can wrap your hand around it really nice and tight. It's not uncomfortable or anything. Let's put together the slide. Take your firing pin, put that in there, slide that in. There's no real orientation for this, it can move around. And then you just push that down while pushing this piece in. It'll pop into place. Take your extractor spring, plop that into place. Kind of goes diagonal, there's a recess for it. Whoops! And then your extractor you can hold in with your thumb while you push in the pin. It's actually easier to get the punch in there first and then punch in the pin from the other side. So this pin will displace your punch while you're sliding it through. And then once it's in partially, you can hammer it the rest of the way with the punch. Make sure it's not protruding, otherwise it'll interfere with your slide. Now grab your rubber buffer. It needs to sit with this piece out to the back, so that's the way it works. And what that does is just let your slide smack into it. So I'll show you. So that allows your slide to hit without making a big clanking noise. Now without that buffer, it sounds like this. So with that buffer, it actually dampens the recoil quite a bit. And that buffer allows it to hit back and then bounce out forward, so it's pretty good. So stick that buffer on there, put the spring on there. So the trick to this is, since the guide rod doesn't have much flex to it, you pull the spring forward with the buffer and then it slides in. And then the final step is pretty easy. You just line that up again, those two lines, and then punch this in. So there you go. That's how you disassemble and reassemble the CZ-75 Shadow. I hope that helps. Thanks for watching.